In a forgotten corner of Mississippi, a family lived so far from the world that no one noticed when something unthinkable began happening inside their home. A secret so disturbing, it would take decades to fully understand. This is the story they tried to bury. In the depths of rural Mississippi, buried beneath layers of mud, fog, and forgotten roads, one family story would eventually emerge as one of the most disturbing ever uncovered in American history. A story so unsettling that even hearing it spoken aloud creates an instinctive sense of discomfort. A story involving a man who fathered children with his own grandmother. Those words alone carry a weight that feels unnatural. Wrong. As if they should never exist in the same sentence. Yet in the early 1960s, in the isolated swamplands of Humphreys County, that nightmare quietly took shape. It began with whispers. In the small community of Bloodline, rumors started drifting through town in the summer of 1962. They traveled slowly, passed between grocery aisles, church pews, and dusty front porches. At first, no one paid much attention. Strange stories were nothing new in places where isolation bred secrecy. But this time, something felt different. The Caldwell family rarely showed themselves. When they did, people noticed. They lived miles outside town, on a patch of soggy land surrounded by murky water and dense vegetation. Reaching the property required navigating narrow dirt roads that vanished under rain and mud for months at a time. Visitors almost never went there. And the Caldwells never invited anyone in. When Margaret Caldwell and her grandson Elijah appeared in Bloodline to buy supplies, they kept their heads low. Their eyes constantly scanned the streets. Their movements were stiff, guarded, as if they were afraid someone might see too much. Margaret was 58 years old. A widow for more than 20 years, she had raised her family alone after her husband's death. By 1962, she lived only with Elijah, her 27-year-old grandson. He had returned to the swamp property in 1957, after his parents were killed in a car accident. With nowhere else to go, he came back to the only home he had ever known. Back to Margaret. Neighbors remembered how she treated him when he returned. Not like a grown man. Not like an adult. She treated him like a child who had never left. Protected. Sheltered. Possessed. The swamp surrounding their home acted like a natural wall. Thick reeds. Dark water. Clouds of insects. Endless humidity. During rainy seasons, the road disappeared completely, leaving the house cut off from the outside world. For weeks. Sometimes months. In many ways, it was the perfect place for secrets to survive. And they did. Until October of 1962. That month, Margaret Caldwell was admitted to the local hospital. In labor. For most of Bloodline, the news felt unreal. A woman nearing 60 years old, giving birth. Doctors were stunned. Nurses whispered in hallways. But what disturbed them most wasn't her age. It was her silence. Margaret refused to name the father. She offered no explanation. No story. No excuses. She simply stared ahead and said nothing. Dr. Howard Reynolds, the physician who delivered the baby, noticed immediately that something was wrong. The newborn's face was asymmetrical. Its skull was unusually small. Several fingers were fused together. Its cries were weak. Strained. In his private medical notes, Dr. Reynolds described severe congenital abnormalities and signs of serious developmental impairment. But those documents would remain hidden for decades. At the time, he had little authority to act. Still, word spread quickly. A near 60-year-old woman. A deformed child. No father. No explanation. Within weeks, Sheriff James Wilson quietly opened an investigation. Nothing public. Nothing official. Just questions. He assigned a young deputy, Robert Thompson, to observe the Caldwell property. Drive by. Make casual visits. Watch. Listen. Report back. Neighbors had already begun complaining. Strange noises at night. Curtains never opening. Children's voices that no one ever saw. Screens nailed shut. Windows blocked. Something was happening inside that house. And no one knew what. During his first visits, Thompson noticed how reluctant Margaret was to let him inside. She stood in doorways. Blocked entrances. Spoke quickly. Smiled too much. When he finally stepped into the home, the smell hit him first. Dampness. Mold. Stagnant air. And beneath it all, something faintly metallic. Like sickness. Like decay. Inside, he found more than just Margaret and Elijah. He found children. 3 of them. All thin. All quiet. All strangely still. Their eyes followed him everywhere. But their mouths barely moved. In his diary, Thompson later wrote, "They barely spoke. They seemed afraid of words. They moved like their bodies didn't fully belong to them. They looked unfinished." Each child showed signs of physical abnormality. Unusual facial structures. Poor coordination. Weak muscle control. Their existence raised a terrifying question. Where had they come from? No records. No birth certificates. No school enrollment. No medical history. They were invisible. Until January 1963. That winter, one of the children, a boy around 5 years old, was rushed to the hospital with severe pneumonia. Malnourished. Dehydrated. Barely breathing. Doctors immediately noticed signs of neglect. And something else. Something deeper. Something genetic. Something that pointed toward a truth no one was prepared to face. And for the first time, Margaret Caldwell would no longer be able to remain silent. The hospital room was quiet when Margaret Caldwell finally spoke. Outside, winter rain tapped softly against the windows. Machines hummed. Nurses moved in and out, pretending not to listen. But everyone was listening. The 5-year-old boy lay unconscious in the next room, fighting for breath. Doctors had stabilized him, but they were deeply concerned. His body showed signs of long-term malnutrition. His immune system was dangerously weak. And his physical development suggested something far more troubling than poverty. When hospital staff asked Margaret about the child's father, she did not hesitate. She did not cry. She did not hesitate. She did not lower her eyes. She simply said the words. Elijah is their father. Nurse Susan Parker, who stood beside the bed that day, would later recall the moment with disbelief. She said it like she was talking about the weather, Parker explained. No shame. No fear. No hesitation. Just a statement of fact. Elijah. Her grandson. The father of all for children. In that instant, years of rumors collapsed into certainty. The sheriff's office was notified immediately. Within hours, social workers, investigators, and medical officials were involved. The quiet swamp house that had existed outside the world's attention was suddenly under a harsh spotlight. Sheriff Wilson later admitted that even his most experienced deputies were unprepared. "We'd seen abuse," he said. "We'd seen neglect. But nothing like this." Deputy Thompson was ordered back to the property, this time with a team. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. The house had no electricity. No plumbing. No heating. Candles and oil lamps provided dim, flickering light. Water was collected from rain barrels. The walls were covered in old newspapers, yellowed and peeling, lead-like skin. Pinned among them were drawings made by the children. Distorted figures. Twisted faces. Dark shapes with no clear meaning. Social worker Jean Roberts described the home as a museum of suffering, frozen in time. There were no toys. No books. No evidence of schooling. The children slept on thin mattresses laid directly on wooden floors. Most disturbing of all was how normal everything seemed to them. They did not cry when strangers entered. They did not ask for help. They did not run. They simply watched. Quiet. Resigned. When interviewed separately, each child referred to Margaret as Mommy and Elijah as Daddy. Not grandmother. Not uncle. Not brother. Mommy and Daddy. To them, this was reality. Medical examination soon painted a devastating picture. All for children showed signs of severe developmental delay. Abnormally small skulls. Congenital heart defects. Neurological impairment. Poor muscle tone. Speech delays. Doctors suspected what geneticists would later confirm. These were the consequences of repeated inbreeding. The accumulation of harmful recessive genes. A biological collapse unfolding inside fragile bodies. Dr. Lawrence Peterson, consulted by authorities, explained it plainly. When close relatives have children, he said, the risk of serious defects increases exponentially. In this case, the damage was multiplied by isolation. Meanwhile, investigators turned their attention to Elijah. At first, many in Belwan saw him only as a monster. A predator. A criminal. But psychological evaluations revealed a more complicated truth. Elijah functioned emotionally like a teenager. Sometimes younger. He struggled with basic social skills. He avoided eye contact. He relied entirely on Margaret for decisions. Food. Money. Movement. Permission. For nearly 6 years, he had lived under her complete control. Reverend Thomas Williams, who had known Elijah since childhood, testified that he had always been withdrawn. He never fit in, the Reverend said. He lived in his own head. When he came back from Memphis, he was worse. Like he'd given up on being part of the world. Psychiatrists began uncovering a pattern. Margaret had isolated him. Gradually. Systematically. She discouraged outside friendships. She framed outsiders as threats. She reinforced dependence. She convinced him that only she understood him. Only she loved him. Only she would never abandon him. According to later evaluations, Elijah's capacity for consent was severely impaired. Dr. Richard Matthews, the court-appointed psychiatrist, concluded, "He shows clear signs of prolonged psychological manipulation. His autonomy was dismantled over years. He was conditioned to obey." But Margaret showed no such uncertainty. When questioned, she remained calm, defiant, unapologetic. She insisted she had done nothing wrong. She claimed she was protecting the family, preserving the Caldwell bloodline, keeping outsiders from corrupting them. In her mind, what she had created was not abuse. It was duty. And as authorities dug deeper, they would soon discover that this twisted belief system had been forming for decades. Hidden inside old journals, buried in handwritten confessions, waiting to be uncovered. The most disturbing evidence in the Caldwell investigation was not found in medical files or police reports. It was found in notebooks. Hidden inside a rusted metal trunk beneath Margaret's bed, investigators uncovered more than 20 handwritten journals. Some dated back decades. Others were recent. All were meticulously kept. Page after page, Margaret had documented her thoughts, fears, hopes, and obsessions. Reading them was like stepping directly into a fractured mind. In the earliest entries, written shortly after Elijah returned in 1957, her tone was almost gentle. Maternal. Protective. She wrote about how lost he seemed after his parents' death. How fragile. How dependent. How empty without guidance. But over time, the language shifted. Affection became possession. Concern became control. Love became entitlement. One entry from 1958 stood out. "He is mine now," she wrote. "As he was always meant to be. The world took his parents, but it will not take him from me. We are all we have." Later entries grew darker. More obsessive. More desperate. "We are the last real Caldwells," she wrote in 1960. "Blood must stay pure. Outsiders bring rot. We must protect what remains." To investigators, the journals revealed a woman who had slowly constructed her own moral universe. A world where isolation was virtue, control was love, and exploitation was destiny. Psychologists reviewing the writings suggested untreated mental illness, reinforced by decades of social isolation. Margaret had grown up during the Great Depression in an extremely closed swamp community. Marriages between cousins were common. Outside influence was minimal. Education was limited. Her understanding of family boundaries had never fully developed. Further research uncovered that Margaret herself was the daughter of first cousins. Generational genetic and cultural isolation had shaped her worldview long before Elijah returned home. Historian Dr. Robert Johnson, who studied Mississippi's isolated communities, explained it this way. "These families existed in cultural vacuums. They developed private rules. Over time, those rules replaced broader social norms. In the Caldwell's case, that vacuum became a breeding ground for tragedy. By mid-1963, the legal process began. The state charged Margaret and Elijah with improper relations, child neglect, and psychological abuse. The courtroom proceedings were closed to the public to protect the children's identities, but details inevitably leaked. And when they did, the reaction was explosive. Newspapers across the country picked up the story. Radio hosts debated it. Churches preached about it. People struggled to comprehend how such a situation could exist in modern America. The Washington Post published a lengthy investigation titled "Horror in the Mississippi Swamps." The article exposed failures at every level. No welfare checks. No school enrollment monitoring. No medical follow-ups. No community intervention. How does a family vanish in plain sight? The article asked. Who was responsible for noticing? And who chose not to look? Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. Margaret sat rigid, expressionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She never cried, never apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing. When asked if she regretted her actions, she replied simply, "I did what was necessary." Psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Parker testified that Margaret genuinely believed she had fulfilled a sacred obligation. In her mind, Parker explained, she was preserving something holy. She did not experience guilt. She experienced righteousness. Elijah, by contrast, appeared broken. He avoided eye contact. He spoke softly. Sometimes not at all. During testimony, he often looked toward Margaret instinctively, as if seeking permission. Psychiatric evaluations painted a bleak picture. Emotionally stunted. Severely dependent. Unable to function independently. Dr. Matthews summarized his condition. He was shaped from childhood to submit. His identity never fully formed. He existed in her shadow. This created an unprecedented legal dilemma. Was Elijah a criminal? A victim? Both? Public opinion demanded punishment. But mental health experts urged caution. They argued that Elijah lacked meaningful autonomy. That he had been psychologically imprisoned long before any physical crime occurred. Meanwhile, the children were transferred to specialized care facilities. Doctors, therapists, and child development experts worked intensively to stabilize them. Progress was slow. Painful. Many basic skills had never been learned. Trust had to be built from nothing. Sarah, the second oldest, emerged as a quiet leader. Despite her limitations, she comforted her brothers. Held their hands. Intervened when they were frightened. Dr. Catherine Stevens, who worked closely with the children, described her as remarkably resilient. She became their shield, Stevens said. Even after everything, she protected them. By September 1963, the trial neared its conclusion. The judge prepared to deliver a verdict in one of the most complex cases Mississippi had ever faced. A case involving crime, mental illness, generational isolation, institutional failure, and children who had paid the price for all of it. And as the courtroom waited, another question lingered in the background. What would happen to the victims after the headlines faded? The courtroom was silent when Judge Harold Thompson rose to deliver the verdict. No murmurs. No whispers. No movement. After months of testimony, psychological evaluations, and medical reports, the fate of the Caldwell family would finally be decided. Margaret Caldwell stood without assistance. Her posture was straight. Her face unreadable. She listened as the charges were read aloud. Improper relationship. Child neglect. Psychological abuse. Systematic manipulation. Each count described only fragments of what had truly happened in the swamp. The judge spoke slowly, carefully. This case represents a failure not only of individuals, he said, but of an entire community and system that chose not to see. Margaret was found guilty on all charges. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison without the possibility of parole. There was no visible reaction. No tears. No anger. No protest. She simply nodded once, as if the outcome had always been inevitable. Elijah's sentence was different. The court ruled that he was mentally incapable of full criminal responsibility. He was committed to a state psychiatric institution for long-term treatment. Some members of the public were outraged. Others felt relief. Experts maintained that punishment alone would not undo decades of psychological captivity. Judge Thompson summarized the dilemma. We cannot punish someone for a prison they were forced to inhabit since childhood. With the legal process concluded, attention shifted to the 4 children. Now separated from their former life, they faced an unfamiliar world. Electric lights. Running water. Televisions. Classrooms. Doctors' offices. Simple things that most children take for granted. Child specialists debated their future. Keeping the siblings together offered emotional stability. Separating them risked further trauma. Ultimately, 2 carefully selected adoptive families were chosen. William and Sarah were adopted by a couple of teachers in Jackson. James and Thomas went to a family of physicians in Memphis. Both households received specialized training, medical guidance, psychological support, and long-term monitoring. The road to recovery was long. William suffered frequent seizures and progressive vision loss. James battled chronic respiratory infections. Thomas underwent multiple heart surgeries. Sarah, despite her limitations, showed remarkable growth. She learned to read, to communicate, to trust. Follow-up reports described slow but steady improvement. For the first time, the children were experiencing safety. Meanwhile, Margaret began serving her sentence in the Mississippi State Penitentiary. For 15 years, she remained largely silent. She refused most psychological counseling, rarely received visitors, never publicly recanted her beliefs. In 1978, she died in custody. An autopsy revealed something unexpected. Margaret had suffered from mosaic Turner syndrome, a rare genetic condition. Doctors concluded that it partially explained her ability to conceive at an advanced age. The discovery reignited academic interest in the case. Some experts argued for a more nuanced understanding. That Margaret was not only a perpetrator, but also a product of genetic vulnerability, mental illness, and extreme isolation. It did not excuse her actions, but it complicated them. That same year, Sarah Caldwell graduated from high school. Now known as Sarah Johnson after adoption, she had surpassed every early expectation. She stood on stage, diploma in hand, as living proof of resilience. Her adoptive mother later said, "She turned a nightmare into a future." At 22, Sarah made a courageous decision. She enrolled in the University of Mississippi's social work program. In a rare public interview in 1985, she spoke quietly about her past. "I don't remember much," she said, "but I carry the scars. If my story can protect even one child, it means something." Her brothers followed different paths. William remained dependent on specialized care until his death at 26. James achieved semi-independence with ongoing support. Thomas, despite severe health challenges, developed a talent for painting that gained local recognition. Elijah remained institutionalized until his death in 1987. Doctors reported that he never fully understood the magnitude of what had occurred. Dr. Matthews reflected. He lived and died inside a psychological cage built by someone else. The Caldwell property was abandoned for years. Locals avoided it. Stories circulated. Whispers of haunting. In 1992, county authorities demolished the house. A symbolic attempt to erase a dark chapter. But the legacy endured. The case led to sweeping reforms in Mississippi's child welfare system. Improved monitoring. Expanded social worker training. Mandatory rural outreach. Governor Paul Johnson Jr. called it the reckoning. Nationally, the case became a cornerstone in genetic and sociological research on isolation and consanguinity. Dr. Mary Williams summarized its significance. It showed how biology, culture, and neglect can collide. In 1995, Sarah founded the New Beginnings Foundation, supporting children from abusive and isolated environments. In 2001, she received the Mississippi State Humanitarian Award. "We are not our past," she said. "We are our choices." Today, the Caldwell case remains a warning. About isolation. About silence. About what happens when communities look away. Because what happened in that Mississippi swamp was not created by monsters alone. It was created by neglect, by distance, by indifference, and by the dangerous belief that some lives are too remote to matter. If you watched until the end, you understand why these stories must be told. Leave a comment saying, "I watched until here." And if you want more untold cases from America's forgotten places, make sure you're subscribed. Every view, every share, every comment helps bring light into places where darkness once ruled.